right, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Wells. I have been at MEFA for, it'll be 22 years, I think, in March. So it's been a while. I've done a lot of work at MEFA, mostly working with colleges. That's what I do now, but I've done lots of presentations for families on every topic from A to Z about college enrollment. And I've been working with DCF for a number of years with their great presenters and colleagues to let you know about all the services that are available for DCF youth that might be at your school and community. So with that said, I am going to turn it right over to the experts to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Lori. Thank you, Lori, for joining us today. I'm just going to unmute.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. So my name is Lauria Hernandez. I've worked for the Department of Children and Families for about 9 years, and I've been in my current role as an education and training social worker for about 4 years. I process all the DCF tuition and fee waivers and provide support for students who are in college. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. And Rebecca, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Proctor. I have been with DCF for going on 7 years. I've done a little bit of a lot of things, ongoing with kids of all ages, ongoing with adolescents, young adults, adolescent outreach services, and now have been an ETV social worker for about 7 to 8 months now. So I primarily handle the foster child grants and then also process ETVs with Lori as well.
Excellent. Nice to have you, Rebecca. Thank you. And Seth.
My name is Seth Riker. I've been with Department of Children and Families for coming up on 25 years. I've worked in a variety of roles and focusing more on adolescent work for the past 10, and my current role since August of last year, just with the Adolescent Young Adult Support Services Unit, overseeing the educational grants, the checking out court reports for our young adults, and also running some trainings for staff and also for providers as well.
Great. Thank you, Seth. I'm so happy to have all of you here today. So they're going to take turns with the presentation. They each have their own sections that they're going to speak to. But feel free, folks, as we go through to send your questions in, type them in, and we're happy to stop and answer questions for the whole group. We have a number of folks on the line today, but not so overwhelming that we can't, give you some nice individualized attention and answer all your questions. So before I turn it over, I just want to tell you a little bit about MEFA. I think you're mostly probably familiar with MEFA, but MEFA is a state authority here in Massachusetts. We operate as a not-for-profit organization. We've been around for over 40 years, so helping families with savings and college financing through loan programs, as well as our biggest mission here at MEFA is to help with education for families, students, and school counselors like yourself. So we're happy to have you all here. So with that, I am going to turn the presenting duties over to Seth. So Seth, I just made you the host, so you should be able to run the PowerPoint.
Okay. Hopefully it works fine. I know for us, we're used to a different format. So our objectives for today are to know the post-secondary options for foster youth, assist with academic planning for youth pursuing higher education, understand the financial aid process, and be able to assist in accessing DCF supports for post-secondary education. If people could just say out loud or enter into the chat, whatever you're comfortable with, what you feel a student needs in preparing for college or vocational training or other post-secondary education program. And it could just be maybe the most important or one or two important things that you feel that a student would need. See, Laura Lyons funding. Excellent. Yes, definitely. Support information in completing the FAFSA. Thank you, Eileen. FAFSA support. Thank you, Alexa. Access to information about college options. Thank you, Laura. How about if I said specific for DCF foster care youth? Oh, their ID information, social security card, birth certificate, etc. That's right. Thank you, Kevin. Now, if I'm talking specifically about foster youth, do you think there's anything different that foster youth might need in order to be ready? Once again, feel free to say out loud or put into the chat. Combination of emotional support and financial aid, dates in foster care. Excellent. We're going to talk more about those. Maybe a couple more. What might youth in foster care need that perhaps other high school students may not necessarily need as much? You think of their circumstances, their situation, their home life, housing. That is a very huge one that comes up, especially for our youth when they're going on to a 4-year college or university. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Let's see. And actually, I don't know. I don't think it'll let me take over. Financial aid supports primarily from outside sources. Yeah. Excellent. So before a student reaches senior year, there's a lot that has to happen. There's a lot we try to accomplish at DCF. There's a lot of planning, and there's a lot of policy around what needs to happen in preparing our youth for post-secondary education, whether it's going to be college or vocational programming, or even if they're not looking to pursue either and they just want to work on employment and preparing for greater independence. I would say greater independence instead of independence because we're all interdependent. No one is ever truly independent. DCF does have a permanency planning policy that does talk about goals. I mean, most youth that do come into foster care do return home. And some youth who end up in an adoption or guardianship, and then we do have some youth with a goals alternative permanent plan living arrangement where we kind of see ahead of time that they're going to be with us. That can be set from age 16 forward, that they're going to be with us most likely until the time that they're 18, and it kind of focuses our work with them around preparing for life after DCF, talking about college, career planning. So there's a lot that goes into that and helping us to kind of get ready for their future. A lot of our work with adolescents doesn't just start at 16 when we can change the goal to alternative permanent plan living arrangement. Even before that, at age 14 plus, we start talking to youth around completing the youth readiness assessment tool, seeing where they are as far as their goals, their skill development. It helps us with setting goals. We talk about PIAT training, which is a life skills training, which looks at everything from budgeting to household maintenance, to be able to cook, understanding nutrition, employment, getting their license, navigating public transportation, being able to address their own healthcare and mental health and wellness needs. So there's a lot that DCF has in its permanency planning policy to try to help youth get ready and plan ahead prior to the senior year. And the hope is that it's going to build, as things go along from the time a youth enters care all the way up until they actually exit care. And that may be for some of our youth at age 22 or age 23, because at 18, they can opt back in for services and continue to receive support going through college, or perhaps they're doing vocational training. Perhaps they're just working on maintaining employment and developing those skills they need to live on their own. So some of those things that we talk about with foster youth, the same things that parents may talk about, try to help them to determine where they want to go, what are their interests, kind of setting our expectations as far as what they need to do in order to remain in services post 18, and helping them to identify their goals. We want to have those conversations with youth around SATs, PSATs. Also understanding, depending on what their goals are, do they need to take those? If they know where they want to go for school, their reach school or their safety school, are those scores needed? Because I know that that's changing in the colleges now as far as requiring the SAT scores. I know there are vouchers that are available through the College Board that guidance counselors are able to access to help youth pay for the testing. But those are all conversations that we want to have included in the work that we're doing with youth prior to their senior year, and even once they do reach their senior year and beyond.
I made you the host, Seth, so you should just give it a shot to see if you can advance the slides. If not, I can just do them for you.
Okay, let me see. It is. No, it's not. It's not
No,
changing the format.
Click on the screen. Okay. I guess I'll have to do it. Just tell me when you want me to advance a slide. Sorry about that.
No, that works out great. Thank you. The conversations we have with youth now that we want to think of for our foster youth are sometimes those conversations that parents are having, where they're planning that they're putting into helping youth get ready for school. Thinking, are they ready? Socially, emotionally, what kind of supports will they need? Depending upon their learning profile, their social emotional needs, what kind of support will they need to be successful in college? Where are they academically? What do their grades look like? What are their study habits? Are they ready to take that on? Looking at colleges, researching that. We do have our college fair that's coming up. As Stephanie said earlier, it's going to be on April 19th from 11 o'clock till 1 o'clock at the Doubletree in Westboro. The flyer is in the chat. We do want to encourage, if you are working with any foster youth that are sophomores, juniors, or even seniors, we want to try to encourage them to attend the college fair, to meet with, there's a lot of state universities, colleges, there's community colleges, there's four-year schools, the UMass system is there. There are a few private schools and also some vocational schools. It is a chance for them to start thinking about it earlier on. The earlier, the better. And second, we just advance the next one.
So I'll just run through, many of this. Okay. So just going over the types of financial aid that there are, much of this may be familiar. I don't know, Stephanie, if you're on slides, if you'd be able to go to the next one.
There's a little bit of a delay from when I click to when you're able to see.
Got it.
Are we on the right one now? Sorry about that.
Perfect. Yes, no worries.
Trigger
So
happy here.
a quick overview, as much of this is probably familiar to many of you, but financial aid, it all gets determined by the FAFSA that students have to fill out. And then it's a federal calculation to determine the student's need based off of income and what becomes the estimated family contribution. And it also factors in what, the student's going to be living on campus or off campus. So there's that direct cost of the actual tuition and fees, and then indirect of things like books and supplies, transportation. So the financial aid a student gets, whether it's through the FAFSA, through DCF programs, it can't exceed the cost of attendance. So that's where the cost of attendance can be different for different students at the same school, based off of full-time or part-time, based off of on-campus or off-campus. So it's kind of standardized in terms of the calculations, but then each unique student situation impacts that aid. So the grants and scholarships can come from federal, which would be the FAFSA, state government. Massachusetts has the Mass Grant, and there's also institutions often, whether it's a private company, whether it's the school, will have their own nonprofits, so they can come from a variety of partners. So grants don't need to be paid back, with the exception of students. Sometimes if they withdraw after the add drop period during the semester, sometimes the institution will have to return funds that the student may then be responsible. So there are some instances where, depending on the student completion of the program, they may need to be repaid, but generally grants don't need to be repaid. Loans, the federal loans, they're subsidized and unsubsidized. So the unsubsidized start accruing interest while the student is in school, whereas the subsidized, that interest doesn't start until after they have left school. So they generally have the lowest interest rate or a lower interest rate. And then that amount is determined through the school in combination with the FAFSA data. So in order to access those loans, they do have to complete like entrance counseling. There's a master promissory note. So it's something that even if a student is awarded it on their FAFSA, they're not automatically given that loan. There are some steps they have to accept it. There are some steps they have to go through before it gets issued, so that students aren't just getting loans without knowing, what they are. And then exit counseling is also required by law. So if a student leaves school before graduation or when they're graduating, which gives information about preparing for the repayment, the rights and responsibilities of a borrower. And there's also information on studentaid.gov regarding for students to know their repayment options. And then private loans, we try and have students avoid this because money is borrowed from a bank, a credit union, or private agencies, generally a significantly higher interest rate, and there's no deferment or forbearance the way that there is with the federal loans. And that those repayments will start when the student is in school, and interest will start accruing immediately. So there is a much larger risk and financial commitment potentially with those private loans. There is a part of FAFSA, students will sometimes, they have the option to check and ask if they want to be considered for work study. It will show up as a part of the FAFSA package. However, it's not money that's automatically going towards the student bill. So it's money as a part of the FAFSA that's given to the school. The student must then find an on-campus job and get hired to an on-campus work study, but then that money comes to the student. So that if they're planning to use it towards their bill, it would then be on the student to take their paycheck and pay that to the school. So we typically encourage students to, it might be an option, but not to count that against their bill per se, because it's not, it's money coming in their pocket. So they have an expense come up. It's very easy, very quickly for that money to, get diverted to other needs or other wants. And then scholarships, which again can be community-based, for coming from the school, they're typically merit or athletic based, but can be, off of other criteria. Next slide, Stephanie. So the types of aid, as I mentioned, the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, which is completed online, and we'll get them that federal, the option for most of our students will qualify for the Pell Grant, Mass Grant, federal loans. Looking at the high school guidance office, that for local scholarships that you or your colleagues may be aware of to your community, to your population. School aid, a lot of financial aid offices at higher education institutions have pretty robust listings for scholarships. It is really important. Some schools have, a lot for incoming freshmen and maybe transfer students, but not as many scholarships once a student's already enrolled. So say they're a sophomore or junior. So I really encourage students who are going to have that financial need to be looking when they're coming into the school for what they may be able to get and continue through their years there. And then the DCF financial aid resources, there are several programs that there are qualifying criteria for, but that a youth may be able to access to also help pay for school. Seth, if you want to jump in.
I apologize, I thought I had muted. So all DCF youth do have to complete a FAFSA in order to receive any assistance from DCF. I know often there's discussion around tuition and fee waivers. That is not an automatic dismissal of a cost for youth. They have to qualify for financial aid in order to receive that, assuming that they meet the guidelines for eligibility with DCF. So they do have to complete the financial aid application. If for some reason, if they're found to be ineligible for financial aid, then they also do lose that waiver and they're responsible for paying tuition and fees. So it's important that all foster youth do complete that. They do speak to their DCF social worker, for those who have an adolescent outreach worker, or you can contact Lori or Rebecca to try to determine eligibility. Because there are a lot more considerations for our youth, it's important to try to complete the FAFSA as soon as possible. Of course, early completion means first consideration or early consideration, but it's important that we try to we have time to iron out some of those challenges. We don't want to get to the start of the fall semester and we're still trying to figure out some of these things, or we're already in the fall semester and we're trying to figure out eligibility. We're trying to figure out what they qualify for. So we want to make sure we get ahead of that. So it is important that youth that are in foster care, that are going to college or vocational programming afterwards, that they do have conversations, that there are discussions around what they are eligible for. Our area offices in the regions also do have educational fairs or open houses where they can talk to youth, to foster parents about eligibility, to have those conversations early on and try to get that. That will be starting in February. Each region or area office will be announcing their dates for the youth. But those are conversations that you might start having with them to help them prepare and to think ahead about some of these things. Sometimes by answering some of the questions as they're completing the FAFSA, they may become eligible for independent status, and it's important that they get documentation. The DCF social worker, supervisor, or even Rebecca and Lori, our ETV social workers, they can also help with getting the letter of documentation as far as that the youth being awarded the state. So if they do turn 18 while they're in DCF custody, we're able to get that done. For youth that are adopted through DCF, they are eligible for tuition and fee waiver depending on how old they are when they're adopted, that or placed in a guardianship. That may also make them eligible for other financial aid assistance through DCF. So those are all things we're going to make sure we get ahead of, because it's a shame when we have a student that has already gone through a semester or even a year, and now they're asking about tuition and fee waiver, and they could have benefited from that because we can't award that and pay for past years or past semesters. So we do want to make sure that we're getting ahead of that. So DCF does have programs at college fairs. We have the educational fairs for the area offices and regions. There are also this FAFSA Day in Massachusetts. So FAFSA Day is a nonprofit volunteer-driven organization that provides assistance to help complete the FAFSA application. So there are many ways and many opportunities for assistance for DCF foster youth. I know at times when our youth have already been through so much, when they've been traumatized, when they have sometimes fallen into a pattern of closing themselves off to outsiders, it's hard to open up and to share things. So if you are that trusted adult, it's always helpful if we can get support with getting youth to talk about these things, to ask for help and ask for assistance and making sure they follow through with that. It can be hard to start asking for help when you're so used to trying to do things or having to do things on your own.
Thanks, Seth. I just want to share also with FAFSA Day, they're doing monthly programs. So it says FAFSA Day, but it really is a number of days, and MEFA helps run that program and support it. So it's really a Zoom session that folks can log into and go into a private chat room with a financial aid counselor, usually volunteers from local colleges, and have, private conversation, help fill out that form line by line. So if you're with the student, you can jump on with them if you're able. And then I also wanted to mention, it just dawned on me that sometimes students might need in-person help filling out the FAFSA. So Mass EdCo also has locations available for families and students if they need one-on-one assistance filling it out, as well as a number of community colleges also have resources on campus. So let me just go to the next slide here. There we go. Thanks.
And just like any youth, it's important that DCF, youth in foster care, they are collecting the information ahead of time as far as their documents. Sometimes they don't always have a copy of the birth certificate or the social security card. And it's always best if we know, sophomore, junior year that they want to go to college, or perhaps they want to go to a vocational program that might be financial aid eligible, that we start thinking about getting those documents, because depending on when they entered foster care, we may not always have all of that yet. So we want to make sure we get ahead of that, and we're not waiting till the senior year to try to get a copy of the social security card, of the birth certificate, that we start getting this ahead of time. If they have special immigration status, where are we as far as getting their green card? Or if they have refugee status, making sure that we have documentation of their eligibility to file as a non-citizen for financial aid. So those are all things that we want to get ahead of. So like I said, sophomore year, junior year, we want to make sure, as soon as we start identifying, some post-secondary educational goals for the youth, that we want to make sure we're getting ahead of that and making sure they have those documents that they need. I know sometimes we don't always think of youth in foster care as having a lot of assets. I know of one case where we had one youth who actually had quite a number of Bitcoin before it became big. I think maybe paid $1 or so per Bitcoin. So I mean, obviously that was amassed to be a lot. So it's important that they're mindful that we have to ask them. We can't just make assumptions as far as what applies to them, what doesn't, and we want to make sure we're having those conversations with them. Let's go on to the next slide.
Great. So we'll go into some of the sections of the FAFSA that are really crucial for foster youth, and 3 specific questions that they may be able to select in terms of their dependency status question. But just want to take a minute. I don't know, Stephanie, if there's any questions in the chat or if anyone has any questions about anything you want to ask.
I don't see any questions just yet, just a little follow-up one about Mass Ed Co, and I can find that website later on. Okay. Carmen, thank you, Carmen, for sharing. I didn't have the website off the top of my head. So Carmen, thankfully, just shared. She also works at Mass Ed Co. So thanks, Carmen, for sharing. And that's all we have so far for questions.
So looking at the FAFSA, so there's 3 questions. A student can be either a dependent filer, which means they're dependent on, someone else, whether it's a adoptive parent from when they were younger, biological parent. So in that case, they're taking into consideration that parent guardian figure, their financial situation. If a student is an independent filer, as youth who meet the criteria of these questions we're going to go over, it only is going to take into account their income and their assets. So answering yes to one of these questions allows them to skip the parental finance questions, which really is a lot of the bulk of what takes the most time with the FAFSA. So they're able to skip over those sections. And they do not, if you have youth, typically you wouldn't see it with youth who are still in high school, but when youth are getting foster care payments, it might be called vendor payments, it might be called young adult support payments, but that's when the money that would be going to a substitute caregiver is going directly to the young adult to help them offset their housing, food, those expenses. They do not need to include that as income on their FAFSA, just as a note. Ready for the next one, Stephanie? So they will ask on the FAFSA form, if a student at any time after they were age 13, were they in foster care, were they a ward of the court? It'll also, there's a question asking if they were emancipated, and then also if they were had a parent who had no living parent, regardless of those questions. So the answer can be yes to multiple questions, but the one that really, in terms of our foster involved youth who are eligible for these programs, is if at any time after age 13 were they in foster care. And that holds true even if a youth was in care and returns home. So a youth could have been in foster care from 14 to 17 and returned home, or been adopted at that point. It could be a week after they were 13. It really is 13 is the key date. And then typically the schools will ask for more information and be able to make a determination about whether they're going to accept that independent filer status. So this is just a screenshot of the question. Are you a foster youth, or were you in the foster care system at any time? And then there is a expansion of it since 13. And then this shows you where it'll ask about the parents' highest education, and youth are able to select other unknown. If they do know and want to put it in, it doesn't create an issue in terms of being an independent filer, but they are able to just select other unknown. And then next slide, Stephanie. So just this is a little bit of the expansion and notes that are available to students going through the FAFSA. So this just explains a little bit more about why, when they should answer yes. So if they had no living parent, even if they're now adopted, you're in foster care, even if you're no longer in foster care, we're a dependent or ward of the court, even if you're no longer so today. And as a note, for someone who's incarcerated, they're not considered a ward of the court. So you'll see the use of foster care and ward of the court language there for this, the same. If you're a ward of the court, that would be the same as foster care for these programs. And sometimes students will be selected for verification, which is up to the financial aid office at the school that they'll be attending. So that's if they might be looking for additional documentation to say, yes, the student was in foster care. We'll go over some of what that documentation looks like. but it's ultimately, just because you answer this on the FAFSA, it doesn't mean that that's like a one and done. The school will often ask for additional verification, additional documentation to show that the student was in one of these situations. And the next one. This just provides information for students who are not able to enter parent information, and just goes over that the student will be able to skip steps 4 and 5, which would be the parent information, and go to step 6. But again, it notes that the student really needs to follow up with the financial aid office at the college that they attend, because they want to make sure that we definitely do see if you're selected, if a student's selected for verification and the required documents aren't sent in, that student isn't going to be able to get a finalized financial aid package. So it's not just a matter of administrative, it's a matter of them actually being able to access aid, to make sure, the same way that they might need to send in a photo ID or something. It kind of falls in the same category of steps that they'll need to take, and it will show, either they'll get an email saying what's needed, it'll show in their student portal to-do list, and there is on the FAFSA a link with contact information for the ETV or independent living coordinator. So for Massachusetts, it will direct to our assistant commissioner for permanency, Stephen Miller, and then from there she'll get it either to Seth or lawyer, myself, and we can help follow up with that student if they have questions. And Seth will go on for care and custody.
And we do have one question, so if you're going to cover it later, we can hold off. But I just wanted to throw this out there. Are students eligible for any resources if they had DCF involvement in their family, but were not formally placed in foster care?
For the DCF programs, and in terms of like selecting that they were in foster care, they would have needed to be in care and custody, so in an out-of-home placement. So if they had a sibling who was, but they were not, then they would not qualify under this. Seth will talk a little bit about like the care and custody piece, right? Because custody is custody, so a court order. Care is being in a foster placement. So Seth can kind of talk about the distinctions and criteria for eligibility for those two pieces.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So for the different types of custody, we do have our protective custody, also known as the care and protection petition, when the children are removed due to issues of abuse and neglect. We have youth that come into care through the child requiring assistance petition, or CRAW, what used to be called the CHINs, for those of you who've been around as long as I have been. There are some youth that come into care that are either placed in adoption or guardianship. And depending on what age that occurs, maybe additional assistance might be available to them. And then we also have voluntary placement agreements, when parents voluntarily request that their youth be placed into the foster care system. So depending on what type of custody they have, there's different criteria for eligibility. Like for the tuition fee waiver, for example, if it's a voluntary placement agreement, they do not qualify for that. That's for youth that are not able to return home. If a youth is never removed from care, from their home, at times, like with the CRA, the court will order custody, the DCF, but the child was never removed from the home. There was never an out-of-home order. The child was never placed. So that's going to impact eligibility as well. So these are all questions that would make sure that we are addressing early on. If we're aware that a youth if they were in foster care or at some point were in DCF custody, we want to elevate these questions early on to the social worker or to Lori, to Rebecca, or myself, that we are looking into the cases. We know we'll have to get permission from the youth because of confidentiality, or the family look in the case and just determine whether they are eligible or not. But if these are things that you are aware of, as far as the youth being in foster care, at some point we would make sure we're having those conversations early to help us determine, what type of placement are they in, what type of custody, and then what are they eligible for, if anything, for supports from DCF for education beyond high school. And also, ultimately, the verification will come through us here at the central office. We are responsible ultimately for verifying that someone is eligible and what they're eligible for. So it's important that we try to have those conversations as soon as possible. Like I said, most youth that are placed in foster care do at some point return home. A small number are placed in guardianship or adoptions, and a small number do stay with us, until they are 18. So their situation is going to impact what they are available to get. It is the youth that are placed in DCF custody through a care and protection petition, or it could be a protective order through probate court. They're the ones who do receive or are eligible for the greatest amount of assistance, and that's given their circumstances. And we'll actually be talking about those financial aid awards that are available a little bit further.
So as Seth referenced, so the documentation for students or independent filers is something DCF can assist. Proof of custody status, some schools will call it proof of custody status. Some schools will refer to it as a ward of court letter, but it's documenting, that the youth was in DCF care and custody, and the dates of that. So that's part of where a school might look. Was a student in custody for 2 days? Were they in care for 2 years? So DCF can assist with that. Myself, Lori, Seth can help. That's also documentation that, an ongoing social worker, if you're working with a student and have a relationship, they are able to write. We often end up doing it just due to familiarity, but that is something that other DCF staff are also able to assist with. So the other types of verification, so the ward of court foster care letters, schools sometimes will request income verification, especially if a student hasn't filed taxes or isn't going to, or doesn't have their tax information, which some schools do kind of a basic worksheet. Some schools, I think have lessened up or did lessen up a little bit during the pandemic in terms of getting a letter from the IRS confirming that they didn't file, but that may come back more so. And then proof of residency can be another issue for some of our students. And again, often a letter from DCF verifying where a student is residing will be accepted. And just one note about the custody and the guardianship proof we'll touch on. The guardianships for youth to be eligible have to be sponsored through DCF. So if a family chooses to go with a family friend to probate court and a guardianship is finalized through probate court, that would not, independent of DCF, that would not qualify them for the DCF programs. It has to be a DCF sponsored guardianship, meaning the youth was in DCF care and left DCF care to a supported guardianship. And the age that either guardianship or adoption happens makes a difference in terms of what they're eligible for DCF aid. And we'll look at, when we talk in more depth about each of the types of programs, we'll go into that a little bit more. But that's, again, I always encourage to reach out. We can verify eligibility for students, because we do sometimes have a student who, may be confused, maybe had a sibling in foster care, or I worked with someone recently who is, adamant they were adopted, but it actually was a guardianship. So, we can always, with the, appropriate release of information, can always verify that.
Just to add on to what Rebecca was saying, also with adoptions, those also have to be done through DCF. Any private adoptions that are done or international adoptions, those are not part of DCF. So they would not qualify for financial assistance through DCF for college. But it is the adoptions that are done and sponsored by DCF that do qualify them for some support.
Thank you. So after the FAFSA, the verification process, we just talked about those pieces, but just to reiterate, it's so important that the student is, reading letters and emails they might be getting from the school, that the caretakers are also reviewing that, and due dates, because important notices often get missed. We also see sometimes a student can be eligible for FAFSA. So like I said, often the Pell Grant is what we see our students receive, and the Mass Grant, a student can file a FAFSA application May 1st for that year, and they may still get FAFSA aid, but they're past the deadline for the Mass Grant, the state aid. And the notice that goes out about Mass Grant, I get a ton of students who call because they think it means they're not getting any FAFSA aid. So there's often confusion about, you can be ineligible for the Mass Grant, but still be eligible for other FAFSA aid. So it's really important that they're reading that in detail. It's a great time, if your relationship working with the youth or the caregiver, to encourage them to look at like their junk email. If you have a student, we see this a lot too, students who are using their school email to apply for FAFSA, to apply for colleges, and then they lose access to that email, depending on different schools. I know sometimes it's shortly after graduation, sometimes it's months, sometimes it's a year. But if a student is using that school email on their FAFSA, on their applications, that's what all of those agencies are then going to have on record for them. So if the FAFSA is trying to reach them about an error and an email is bouncing back, then the student's going to be missing out on information. So we really encourage, whether it's a Gmail account, some other email, having them set that up to start this college process is a really great time to do that. So, and also on DCF's end, if we're trying to reach out to them, maybe freshman year, they get a scholarship, we're trying to reach out to them about it the next year, and we only have the school email, we won't be able to, might not be able to connect with them depending on the phone contact. And then once the student's accepted, processes their FAFSA is when this information would be asked for.
Once the students apply for financial aid, and the colleges will provide financial aid award letters, it's important that they are taking it to a trusted adult. I know that some of our youth in foster care have difficult times identifying trusted adults. So they may be bringing it to the school guidance counselor, maybe a foster parent, maybe the social worker, but it's important that someone does review this with them and that they do not automatically decline any health insurance to make sure that we understand the circumstances, where they're going to be attending school. They do have Mass Health if they're attending a school in state. They can get a waiver for the required insurance provided by the school. If they're attending school out of state, that needs to be a further conversation. For youth that are turning 18, actually now after on or after January 1st of this year, they will qualify for Medicaid coverage out of state, but that we need to also look at, what does that mean if they're claiming residency in another state, that they could end up losing if they're eligible for a foster child grant, they may lose the opportunity to be able to get that grant. So we need to make sure we're having further conversations about that and not just automatically accepting or declining things, that we need to make sure that we're looking at this together before they accept or decline anything, to make sure that they are receiving the maximum aid that we can provide for them, and that they understand their options with regards to aid. We do have some youth when they go out of state, they may eventually change and claim residency in another state and take advantage of the in-state cost for tuition and fees, and that may be more than what they're getting from certain DCF funding sources. So it may make sense for them to do that then. But it's important we're always having this conversation, because sometimes it's not until afterwards that a student has made a choice or made a change that we're catching these things, and some of these things can be very difficult or impossible to undo. So to make sure that we're getting ahead of that, whenever possible, if we can get the financial aid award letter as soon as they're getting it, if they can share that with us, or they're sharing with you, that we're having conversations about that, so we can help them figure out where to go early on, instead of waiting till the fall, the start of the fall semester, to figure out how they're paying for college.
I also just want to add, in the spring coming up soon, MEFA does a number of webinars. Everything's recorded. We'll have a webinar just for school counselors as part of the MEFA Institute on understanding financial aid offers. So you're always welcome to call or email at MEFA if you have a student with you and you have a quick question. Feel free to utilize our resources too if you need help understanding their financial aid offers.
Great. So we'll dive a little bit into the different DCF specific programs. So the foster child tuition fee waiver and adopted child tuition fee waiver are very similar in how they function. You'll just see them referred to as two different things. The Massachusetts foster child grant, education training voucher, and then the William Warren scholarship. So the first four of those are really based off of care and custody status and are like eligibility on that end, but the William Warren is a competitive scholarship. Thank you, Stephanie. So the tuition and fee waiver is eligible youth who are in DCF protective custody until the age of 18. So as Seth mentioned, that could be a care and protection. It could be a protective probate court order, which is different. It's basically a CMP, but issued through probate. So it's still a court order. And youth who are unable to return home before the age of 18, they have to have not yet turned 25 before the start of that academic year to be able to use the waiver. It is eligible to youth who are adopted through DCF and youth who are placed in a DCF sponsored guardianship. So what's really important with this is it's not something that, it's a one-page application, so to speak. It's really, we need their information, we need their ID to be able to issue a waiver, but then the student needs to take that and provide it to the school. So it's not something that, because they're an independent filer, it doesn't automatically go to the school. It's not automatically on their record. And we, they need to apply, so we're even aware of them to be able to, issue it. We try and catch everyone, but there's certainly especially adopted youth, who maybe we're not aware of. So the waiver waives the cost and tuition of state supported classes only at Massachusetts public colleges. So these state universities, community colleges, other than UMass Medical. It doesn't cover things like books, application fees, room and board, so dorm and meal plans. And that state supported class is important because every school does it differently in terms of making information available about what state supported. Typically day and evening classes are not, and all online classes are typically not. So, a student may go to an eligible institution and have the waiver, but it's possible that specific types of classes may not qualify for the waiver. It may be covered through other aid, but it's also not automatic that just because you have the waiver, all of it will be applied. So the next one we'll talk about is the foster child grant. So as Seth mentioned, students do have to be a permanent legal resident of Massachusetts. So they could have a Mass address their freshman year, get the grant, move out of state, decide they're permanently going to live where their school is. So maybe it's in Chicago. And now they have a Chicago address on their FAFSA. They will be ineligible for it going forward because they're no longer a permanent resident of Massachusetts. So for all of this, youth have to be eligible for FAFSA aid, meaning they're a U.S. citizen or non-citizen eligible under Title IV regulations, a DCF care and protection petition, again, or protective custody. So a voluntary placement agreement, a CRA, child requiring assistance, those students would not be eligible. Similar to the tuition fee waiver, they must have not yet reached their 25th birthday. And they must be, and one other piece with the 20th, I just had someone do this. If they haven't turned 25 yet, but say turn 25 during the fall semester and transfer to a different school for spring, it won't follow them. So they would need to be at that same institution for the spring semester, after they turn 25. And a student must be enrolled full-time. Typically it's 12 credits. It depends on the institution. So whatever number of credits, whatever number of classes that school defines as full-time, they do need to be full-time to get the foster child grant, complete FAFSA when they're eligible for aid, and then meeting the school's requirements for satisfactory academic progress, which just really is a criteria for all of the aid programs, because a student has to be meeting, they call it SAP, has to be meeting SAP to be eligible for FAFSA aid. So then we'll talk about the education and training voucher. So this is one, and the tuition fee waiver and foster child grant can go towards 2- and 4-year colleges. The foster child grant can sometimes be used at some vocational programs, but it's fairly limited in terms of what is eligible. And the tuition fee waiver is noted as Mass public community colleges and universities. The foster child grant can be used in state or out of state at public or private eligible institutions. An education and training voucher can also be used in state, out of state, public, private. And it's the ETV funding that can also sometimes be used for vocational. They still have to accept the FAFSA and be eligible for FAFSA, but some vocational programs. So ETV youth who are DCF custody through age 18, unable to return home. Youth are eligible up until they turn 26 with a 5-year limit on awards. So it's whichever comes first. They receive ETV for 5 total years, or they turn 26. And youth who were adopted or in a kin guardianship with kin after the age of 16 may also be eligible for ETV. Mass has a fairly liberal definition of kin. I've allowed for more flexibility than some other states. So there's that potential, but again, it would need to be reviewed case by case. And students must have their high school diploma or high set GED and able to get the ETV funding.
I do want to add in that the aid that we do have available is for youth that have not obtained a bachelor's degree already. So if they do obtain a bachelor's degree, they're no longer eligible for any financial assistance through DCF. That's the limit of what we're able to provide. We've had some youth that have tried to go back and obtain a second bachelor's degree or attend grad school, and we're not able to assist with that, it's just for that once they get a bachelor's degree, that will also end financial aid as well for us.
So Seth mentioned, college supports offered through DCF, the college fair, thinking about it ahead of time, thinking about it early. The area offices there will be some regional, I think, educational open houses for students. The ETV support, college advising days, they offer one-on-one planning and reviews. And then really thinking about connections for students on college campuses. So financial aid staff, student support services, admissions, housing, really helping students have, whether it's one person, whether it's the office they're going to on campus, really making sure that they have those connections. Something I just, in the interest of time, I think we won't do the activity, but something I just encourage you to really think about for our foster youth. If you have something that, you keep private, people who are close to you, maybe don't know, you don't want them to know. And thinking about if you had to share that to negotiate your housing, maybe to negotiate your employment, right? You are going to have to disclose that all of a sudden to these people, and thinking about for a youth who's going on campus, how, they might be afraid people are going to gossip about them. They're going to be stereotyped, make assumptions. And that's what youth who are going on, to access even these supports, right? They have to tell the financial aid office that they're in foster care. They may have to tell their advisor because they might have a hold on their account because of a delay. So we're really thinking about, for these foster students, how to help them, kind of prepare for that. Think about how can they best limit, control what they share, but even thinking about preparing them for, the social emotional transition of how are they going to talk about winter break, right? How are they going to talk about the holidays with their friends? So just encourage you to kind of keep that in mind as your, frame of reference when you're working with these students and helping prepare them. But different, and in that vein, right? It's a double-edged sword of sharing their situation, but also thinking about what services are available regardless of DCF involvement or not. So, online counseling, mental health wellness centers where they can get tutoring on campus. For our students who have IEPs or other, have a diagnosed disability that may qualify them for accommodations. Because that's something often that does not automatically transfer over. We often see students think it's automatically going to apply because they've had it through high school. IEP can, quote unquote, follow if they bring their necessary documents, meet with disability services. Again, that's another place that they're disclosing. They won't have to disclose to their professors unless they choose to, but that's a step they need to take. It's not something that automatically is going to happen, and they may need to kind of recertify or, every semester as their classes change. So there's definitely, schools are working on building networks. We definitely have more students at state universities. So we have some schools that have really great established, one person point of contact, other schools that are really working on bolstering, having, one contact in financial aid for our students, and network so that students can have a name and a face, because definitely we've had students say that feels more comfortable to know this is who I'm going to go to. This is who maybe doesn't know my story, but is more familiar with similar stories to mine. So they're definitely working, we're working regularly with schools to try and encourage and support and build those relationships.
Thanks. We do have one quick question, if you don't mind me popping in real quick. It's a good one. What happens if the student received the scholarship, did one semester of college, and then stopped one semester of college and then stopped one? Can they still be eligible for the scholarship if they return a year later?
I'll answer that. So yes, they'll be eligible for the scholarship as long as they are up until the age of 25 for the tuition and fee waiver, and ETV 26. They can change schools and it will follow them.
Great.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. Just to add to that, for students to know, they will need to be in good academic standing. So they would still need to be eligible for the FAFSA. So we see sometimes with our ETV, for example, if a student receives ETV 1 year, they're reapplying in the future. They need to provide their grades because they have to show proof of academic progress. So it doesn't mean that they're never eligible again, but it's possible that they may need to, go for a semester and then show us their passing grades to get the ETB again. So there may be some caveats in terms of, how they did that semester, but they absolutely can. We have students who go for a year, come back 3 years later, go for 3, vice versa, take a semester off. So absolutely. So I think that's hopefully right close on time. I don't know if there's any other.
We can keep going if we want to finish wrapping up. I know you guys have a few more things. Usually, sometimes we go over a few minutes. So
Yeah. It's really our contact info is on the next slide, including our director and our manager are on the next slide. But, really any questions, I encourage to reach out. It's always, we stress for anyone who's involved in working with these students, so, always feel free to reach out. And again, we can figure out whatever releases we need. But to look at the students' individual circumstances and what they might be eligible for, because there are some, ins and outs of type of custody, and often there's confusion on, the student, the family. It can be any number of places, or there's confusion about the type of custody, the dates that a youth was in care. So, feel free to reach out, and we can always provide that kind of overview and review, even not specific to a student, if we need to try and, get that info. And there are also outreach workers. So you may also already have relationships with outreach workers who are also a part of adolescent and young adult services staff, who sometimes work one-on-one with students, or maybe as a contact to help with some of the financial aid paperwork as well. And those can be another resource if you have a existing relationship, but if not, feel free to reach out to us.
Excellent. And I'll just encourage folks to type questions in the Q&A, and I will just go over a couple things, and then we'll just end with Q&A. So feel free to type those in. So before we end, I just want to remind everybody that this webinar is one PDP point. So you feel free to, cash those in, and once you collect 10, you're able to cash those in for a PDP certificate through MEFA. So we are approved through DESE to do that. And also we have a school counselor page on MEFA.org with lots of resources that you can just copy and paste onto your website to share with families. So it's right at MEFA.org/school counselor or counselors. So feel free to check that out. And of course, connect with us on social. We're always sharing webinars for families, webinars for school counselors, recordings, scholarship alerts, you name it. Everything's on our social media channels in one way or another. And for those who might have arrived a little bit late, we did record today's session, so I'll share the copy of the recording with the PowerPoint slides, and I will email everybody the flyer, which should be in the chat. It's at the top of the chat, but I didn't want to copy and paste it again during the webinar and mess up our PowerPoint, so I'll copy and paste that again while we're answering questions here. So let's see, we do have one question. If students are unsure of the details or dates of their foster care custody situation, is it better for the student themselves to reach out, or can counselors reach out on their behalf?
I can take that as well. So I prefer a school counselor and to email me or call me, and we'll set up a time to talk to the youth at the same time. That's pretty much how it usually works.
Okay, great. And I think there's one other one in there. So for students who may have been in foster care before age 13, are there education resources available? And I actually got a question like this a couple days ago from a person who is the aunt of a student and took over as foster care at age 2. So this was a very relevant question for some folks too. So whoever wants to answer that one.
I can answer that as well. So if you are talking about if a child was 2 years old and returned home at 3 or prior to age 13, They wouldn't be eligible for the DCF tuition and fee waiver, foster child grant, or ETV. I believe Rebecca or Seth, if they are the William Warren, if they were in custody for a year, they could be eligible for that, correct? There's no
Correct.
age on that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
if they
they'd just
were
be
placed,
eligible for William Warren for at least 1 year.
and if they were placed, if they were adopted through DCF or in a guardianship through DCF, then they could still look at the tuition and fee waiver, regardless of the age when that occurred.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions coming in. So I just want to thank you, Seth, Rebecca, Lori. This was excellent. The more we can do to help these youth, the better. And this is going to be on our website, this webinar, until we do it again next year. So it's there for anybody to watch at any time. So if you have fellow counselors, you want to share internally with other, folks that feel free to do that. We may have another session at some point. We're talking about doing one for families and students, so we might do something like that as well. So keep an eye on emails from MEFA, and we will be sharing all that great information. But until then, feel free to call us. Our 800 number and email is right here if you need assistance. We have a dedicated school counselor line, so feel free to reach out to MEFA if you need anything. And thank you, everybody from DCF, our friends, for joining us today. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything before we end.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, Stephanie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is excellent. We'll send an email out to everybody tomorrow. And I did post the copy of the flyer for the college fair again in the chat, so you can download that. It's in April. Actually, let me just pull it up here. I think you should be able to see it here. So it's April 19th. Oops. And so we'll share this as well so that you can just take that and share with the appropriate students, and MEFA will be there with a table as well. So we're happy to be back in person doing this program. We've been going to this college fair for a number of years, so happy to be doing that again. All right, well, I'm going to end. Seth, did you have anything to add?
I was just going to say, just really working, trying to get the effort, making the effort to get the word out to our youth in foster care, to their social workers, to their foster parents, for those that are in programs. We want to make sure that the youth are aware of it, so that way they can talk to their providers, their care providers, and make arrangements ahead of time. If they have an interest in attending, we want to try to get them interested. We want to try to get them there. We want them to start planning for future, because our youth in foster care need that extra support, and so we want to start it early.
Great, and we're going to share this with our whole school counselor list, which is a lot of them. So we'll make sure we get the word out about this program as well, separately. So, all right, well, thank you, everybody. I know we went a couple minutes over, but it was time well spent, and you'll be hearing from me soon with a copy of the webinar and the PowerPoint slides. So have a great day, everybody, and thank you so much, our friends from DCF, for sharing. Bye.